Welcome to another edition of Chew Chats, where plant-based eating takes the mic. Let's find out who our expert and topic are for today.
Welcome, Dr. Dulaney. Boy, are we excited you're here, because nobody's better qualified than somebody who knows so much about exercise with your ultra extreme events, who knows whole food plant-based diets and the impact of your patients when they switch their diet. So thank you for being here today as we look at longevity as those two variables impact it.
Great to be here with you, as always.
Great. Okay, so let's get started with some slides that will help guide our discussion.
Okay.
We're going to look at longevity and exercise, and not just regular longevity, but longevity that deals with health as well as living a long time. And back in Chat and Chew, we started looking at healthy longevity back, and gosh, it's probably been 12 years now, when we were looking at the work of Jeff Novick. And I know you know that too, Dr. Dulaney. And this is where he pulled out the variables that were common in the three first populations of the blue zones, the places where people lived a long time and they lived with healthy lives. And when you look at that list, it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. You know, a plant-based diet, no smoking, the constant moderate physical activity. We're learning a lot about that now, being engaged in the community, and then legumes and how special those are for all the blue zones. And in the blue zones, my husband and I had an opportunity to go there, and we saw those variables in action. On the left is the 98-year-old Okinawan woman, one of the longest lived women in the world. And her day was so typical for her. I mean, she'd get up, she'd do 2 rounds of exercises on the Okinawa news program. Then she'd go out and work in her garden, come back in, prepare her breakfast, lunch with the food she grew. Then she got her bike and headed down to the restaurant where she's helping preserve the recipes of the centenarians. We met her there for lunch, and then she got on her bike and went back. So that's all the variables tied up into one. And in Sardinia, we were so impressed with these people that lived on cliffs, mountainsides, and their constant moderate activity was going up and down the stairs. The 99-year-old woman that we visited, she had a bedroom and a bathroom downstairs, and then her living with her kitchen upstairs, and she climbed those stairs every day, multiple times. So that's what longevity looks like in the blue zones. But Dr. Dulaney, you've seen something very different in America as we age into disability. And I wondered if maybe you could help us understand this definition of disability life as we age, or disability-free life. What does it look like for most Americans?
I think what people don't realize is that after age 30, we start to lose muscle mass, bone mass, and our ability to use oxygen and get oxygen to our tissues. We also start to accumulate metabolic waste. So, early on, thousands of years ago, the idea was for us humans to live to reproduce. And then after that, whatever happened. Now, through modern medicine, and, we're extending people's lives, but we're not extending, like you said, we're not extending healthful lives. We're just extending lives. And so what we are seeing is accumulation of metabolic waste over time. So the picture you have up there now, obviously the person is very much overweight, their head is forward, they have orthopedic issues, all from accumulation of metabolic waste and disuse. So, the move it or lose it, lotion is motion, those are all very important. And, and typically you see the pattern, people have kids, they become in their, working kids, maybe after school activities, and it's grab food. It's all about quick food. Nutrition is lower on the list. exercise becomes lower on the list. And sometimes there is a portion of people that wake up in their 40s and they say, oh, I got to get back into better shape. And so they start trying to do things, but more often than not, it continues, and people try to go to the gym and they, do their 30 minutes of whatever at the gym. And then they come home. And again, this lifestyle of fast foods and sitting for the rest of the day, continues. And then when people retire, it becomes even more, less exercise and more about eating. And, typically, especially women you'll see the 50-year-olds gain, 10, 15, 20 pounds, and everybody blames menopause for that weight gain. But the reality of it is lifestyle, eating out more, exercising less, losing more muscle mass. It becomes a trifecta for a decline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, not a good picture at all. One of the things that a recent podcast talked about, this was Dr. Peter Attia. He was interviewing Dr. Mike Joyner.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about that. Dr. Joyner said that when we turn 70, half of us, if we break our hip, will die, and the other half weren't in very good shape. And so he mentioned the research that deals with when we're 75, it's like we fall off a cliff, and that we see a real decline in health span. And that at that age, he said, it's more about muscular and bone tissues than cardiovascular issues as we age. Does our heart healthy diet get us to 75 and then exercise make it worth being 75 and older? I mean, is that the way it works?
If you're eating a heart healthy diet, let's say you eat well, but you don't move, mm-hmm. then you have the muscular and bone decline. If you're not moving, you also start to lose balance. And so you're more likely to fall. If you lose respiratory, we breathe, we have to use our chest muscles and our rib muscles, move our diaphragm. And so if you're not exercising, those all become weak. People just breathe with, the upper portions of their chest. And, again, the risk is to fall at 75. And again, 50% of people will die because of that. And it's usually related not necessarily to the fall, but to now you're in bed, further infections. Pneumonia is a big, the biggest reason why people end up dying after a fracture is because they can't breathe, they can't clear secretions. They start to deteriorate at a very rapid rate. Mm-hmm. There was a study that, he actually alluded to on that podcast where it's very well known. They took astronauts, so these are healthy young people that, were very much in shape, sent them into space for a few weeks, bring them back, and their cardiac output declined, their muscle mass declined, their bone mass declined. And then they put them on a training program and it came back. But then when they brought them back at 50, depending on what they did, again, they could deteriorate. So we know that if you're 75 and you break your leg and you're put to bed for a couple of days, surgery and recovery, then you can imagine how much muscle mass you lose in just those few days. So if you've already lost a significant amount and then you lose more, that is usually why, the early demise at that point. Yes. So eating well, most time, and, they also alluded to is nutrition, is it nutrition or is it exercise? And that's sort of the age-old question. The question is whether you can out-exercise a bad diet. I always say you can't. But, on the other hand, you have to be able to have a cardiac output to do some of these things. And most nutrition studies, if somebody's eating healthy, they tend to exercise. Do you know what I mean? It usually goes hand in hand. When we look at nutrition study, those people that are most interested in their diet tend to be most interested in a healthy lifespan, that tend to eat better. When we look at a general population and they're not focused on that, then it's a different story. So, it's really hard to tease it out, but the bottom line is we need both.
I've seen that with the people in our Chat and Chew study group where exercise has made a difference. We've got 2 Health-i-monials with members who have had bone growth in their 70s. And one of them, it was because she added a whole food plant-based diet, even though she exercised first. And then the other one, she added resistance training. And that she'd already was whole food plant-based, and then she added the resistance training, and they both went from osteoporosis to osteopenia. So that it plays out there. But there's been a recent study that said vegans have lower bone density. And I was just wondering about that. I mean, is it just because we're not eating animal protein that we're...
What we do know is that people eat animal products because of the high protein and the acidic environment leach more calcium out of their bones. And so there is more, even a more of a ketogenic diet. It's been well documented that those people lose muscle mass and bone mass because they're breaking down protein in order to generate carbohydrates for their brain and the organs that need carbohydrate. When you say vegans may have a lower bone density, is that skewed towards skinnier vegans with less muscle mass to start with? There's vegan and there's plant-based. There's a wide variety. We know that thinner people, especially thin women, are more likely to get osteopenia or osteoporosis than heavy women. And part of that may be, adipose tissue generates estrogen. So after menopause, when the ovaries cease production or markedly decline production of estrogen, you're relying on exogenous sources of estrogen. You're relying on the pituitary hormones of follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone that continue to promote bone growth. But you're also looking at, so there's less hormonal stimulus to lay down bone. But again, you can give people all the hormone in the world, but if they're not moving and doing strength training, and we also know how they're doing it makes a difference. If people do seated strength training, they're not getting the benefit if they were standing. If their posture is such that they're leaning way forward, they're not getting the pelvic and vertebral stimulus that they would otherwise, non-weight bearing exercise. So, there's a whole host of factors that go into that I would take exception that vegans have a lower bone density across the board. I don't think that that's necessarily the case.
Yeah. And that was interesting about the fat tissue and how it makes the hormone. That's the first time I'd ever heard that. Another variable.
Well, the other thing that happens when you're overweight, you actually have more of a load on your bones, right? So, people think that when someone is tremendously overweight, that it's all fat tissue. But the reality of it is they have a tremendous amount of muscle because you can't lift, a large mass without having some muscle behind it. So, if you're getting out of a chair 5 times a day at 180 pounds, you're lifting more weight than if you're getting out of a chair at 90 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, there's all those risks of being overweight to offset that wonderful advantage.
Right. Again, it's not, I'm certainly not saying that, we should carry a lot of weight so that because there's all those other inflammation, risk of cancer. So, it's not a panacea of being overweight. There are people that will say, well, it's better to be heavy than if something happens to me, I can handle an illness. Well, that's not true either. We know from COVID per se that, people that are overweight have much more high inflammatory proteins that, have a worse outcome over time. So, I'm just, again, when we look at things in isolation, we're not necessarily looking at the total health of a person.
Yeah. That was good. I appreciate you sharing that. We've also seen, and you sent me some studies on this, how resistance training exercise is correlated with memory, improved memory. And of course, that's a biggie for us as we age. We don't want that dementia.
It's true. So if you're, and especially, your picture is upper body, but we know that, the study that I alluded to, if people do squats and build lower upper leg and, glute muscles, lower back, core musculature, that increases blood flow. An increase in blood flow is ultimately going to increase brain flow in less deterioration. When we think low flow states are not consistent with longevity and survival, right? So if we have trickle blood flow, then we have trickle nutrient flow to our head. So we want to be able to have a good cardiac output. And that's where resistance training helps. You're improving the musculature, you're improving the vasculature.
Yeah. I remember the first time I heard about the squats, and I was so glad that you really promote that, as I've seen through your practice. It was Dr. Dean Sherzai, and he was talking about the strong quads, the strongest muscle in our body, pumping that blood up all the way to our brain, because our brains are such hogs for all the nutrients and oxygen and all that. Okay, so what about this? Can you suggest some exercises that, as we look at longevity and trying to avoid that disability longevity, we want the healthful longevity, what exercises would you recommend, or as we develop our programs?
Well, consistency is key. So if people decide, well, I've got to exercise and I'm going to go to the gym, but I hate it, then that you're probably not going to be consistent, and that's not going to work. So, just like I did with my daughter when she was growing up, I exposed her to a variety of different sports to find which one clicked with her. So movement of any type is great. Find what you can do and what you like on a consistent basis. And, so, on your slide there, you have floor and mat exercises. Well, one of the basic things, and especially when you alluded to the Okinawans, is getting up off the floor. I believe that 70% of people over 60 cannot get off of the floor without using, with using no hands or just one hand. So you might be able to get up if you grab onto something, but if you can, get up with just one hand, there's very few people, the percentage starts to go down, and that's because of loss of muscle mass. So, even if people do something that's on the floor and they have to get up, it's an improvement. I have a gentleman training for his first triathlon, and, when you do triathlon, you have to change from your, he's doing a duathlon. So he's got to go from a run to a bike to a run. Well, you've got to change your shoes twice. And I said, the time between you, that the clock is ticking. So you need to get down on the ground and practice putting your shoes on and getting up. And that's a great exercise in and of itself, because you have to bend your hips, you're bending your ankles, you're using your glutes and your quads to get yourself off the ground. So anything that puts you on the ground, and then you can translate that to gardening. My nurse Dawn and I both like to garden and be outside. And when you're, people say they hate to weed, that the sad part about Florida is, we live in a great environment to do outside work. We can do it almost all year round, and it's a great exercise, but it's one of the first things that people hire out as they get older in the United States. But, squatting to pull weeds, lunging to pull weeds, sitting on the ground, getting back up, lifting, pulling, it's a great form of exercise. You're moving your whole body, lifting, grabbing things, carrying mulch, so that counts. Mobility, when you look down in the bottom of your slide, Tai Chi and yoga, great for relaxation techniques, great for mobility, moving your parts. Katy Bowman, and I think you're going to make a reference to her in the end, talks about, have you done a body assessment all day, in the morning or the end of the day of what parts of your body you've moved? Have you reached over your head? Have you been on the ground? Has your foot extended behind you? Have you jumped? When's the last time you jumped? Even if it was, just, a couple times in place. I laugh about that one because when I'm going out of my community in the morning, there's a gate that has a metal sensor for cars, but if you're a human, you don't have enough metal to, most people to trigger the sensor. So I have to jump on the sensor to get out of my gate, so I always think that's my first jump of the morning is when I'm jumping on the sensor to get out. So, So I mean, so I think it's what you're going to do, vary it up, and it has to be, there's with the American Heart Association says 150 minutes of exercise a week, but 150 minutes of vigorous exercise. Just walking the dog, strolling with the dog still counts. But as far as longevity and maintaining our ability to extract oxygen and use muscle, we have to do some vigorous activity. So something that makes you huff and puff a little bit. Not a tremendous amount, but something every week that makes you, some part of it, 10% of your exercise should make you huff and puff.
Yeah. And you can do that with walking if you walk fast, right?
Absolutely. You can pick up the pace, you can do intervals. I think it's all, to me, about mind games, mailbox to mailbox, street sign to street sign. You change the speed. People do a minute fast, a minute slow, 2 minutes fast, 2 minutes slow. There's a variety of different things that you can do, even on the treadmill, that can, make it more exciting or less monotonous, so to speak.
Yeah. And, there's one study, I don't think I sent it to you, but it'll be in the show more section. It was about a British study where they were correlating rates of dementia and steps people may take each day. And of course, like you said, we want to put in some of those vigorous steps to really get our heart rate up. But the magic number was 6,315 steps was when they saw the most decrease in dementia for people in that group. Okay, so we talked a lot about older people, but don't exercise and diet help even when we're younger? And you did a podcast recently that I just thought was fantastic. Of course, all your podcasts are fantastic, but I'm going to put that in the show more section. And this is where you talked about diabetes. You talked about what diabetes is about and then how exercise interacts with that. And I was wondering if you could review that for us, because it seems to me like with children even getting type 2 diabetes, this is something we need to all pay attention to no matter what our age.
Yes. So if someone has diabetes, and just to kind of lay a little bit of a foundation, most, back in the day, they used to call it sugar diabetes. And so people will think that people think that diabetes is associated with a carbohydrates or sugar metabolism. You stay away from sugar, that you'll be okay. And sugar is just, it's the smoking gun. The sugar is increased in the bloodstream because it can't get into the cell where it needs to be used for energy. So if we look at, our whole bodies are about energy production and cellular function. We have to have energy to run. We're like little, we need electricity, so to speak. And we get our energy from carbohydrates mainly, and fat burns in the background. So you can say you have this baseline hum of some fat burning throughout the day. But for the most part, we're burning glucose that we take in, glucose that is stored in our muscles. And so as we exercise, we deplete that. We turn that glucose into energy. It's called ATP. And we have to have organelles in our cells called mitochondria that actually take up the glucose and use it. So the first thing, the glucose has to get in from the blood into the cell. So it's floating around in the cell, and then it starts the metabolism and generates a little bit of energy. And then some of those chemical process those chemical metabolites enter the mitochondria, the little organelle in the cell, and generate more energy. And so the first problem with diabetes is we can't even get glucose into the cell because fat is blocking the uptake. So it's fat that we're wearing. And then it's fat that we're eating. So even they've done studies with Tour de France athletes. If you put them on a stationary bicycle, and they ride hard, and you infuse fat, then you give them glucose. It's harder for the glucose to get in the cell in the presence of fat. So if somebody is wearing a lot of fat, it's harder for the glucose to get into the cell. So their glucose starts to rise into their bloodstream. The bloodstream, then your body produces insulin. Insulin is somewhat the bad player. You have to produce more and more to push the glucose into the cell through the fat. That insulin then generates the production of inflammatory proteins and growth factors that don't help us. So we need insulin to survive, but too much causes, again, inflammation and growth of things like blood vessel clogging and other cells. People with diabetes have increased risk of cancer because of abnormal growth factors. So when you look at exercise and somebody that's diabetic, one of the first things that happen is people don't like it, because if you have diabetes, you're not getting the glucose into the cell to be able to generate the energy. So their energy is lower to start with. They're metabolically sluggish. And so when they start to walk, they just don't have the energy output to sustain. So it takes them a long time to warm up. So it's hard to get people that are metabolically inefficient to actually enjoy exercise, because it's hard at first, so it has to be something that you do. But as you do it, you're generating more, you actually build muscle, which builds more mitochondria, which builds more cell type organelles that can help use the energy. So then the energy can be taken up better by someone that has more muscle. And then again, the more you exercise, you have a little bit more fat burning, you're maintaining a metabolism in the background, and things get better. So, even going from a walk after dinner, and the question is timing of things. We know if somebody has vascular disease and we send them out, we have them eat, and then we send them out for a walk, they can get chest discomfort, because when you eat, you have to have blood flow to your gut to be able to digest the food, get the nutrients that are in the gut. And so now we're asking the heart to pump extra blood to the gut and then extra blood to the muscles for us to exercise. And so often that can be a heart strain. So if somebody has vascular disease, we don't really want them to do that. On the other hand, after you eat is when the glucose raises and the insulin goes up. And it would be nice to be able to burn some of that off if you can, so that you kind of make the funnel into the muscle a little bit better. So we know that about 30 minutes, 45 minutes after eating, if somebody can go for just a light walk in the evening that has diabetes, their glucose will be better for it. You can walk because you're making your muscles more efficient, you're using more energy, and it helps to get the glucose into the cell. So any kind of, again, exercise is going to help the diabetes process.
So the key is to wait just a little bit after you eat, if you have diabetes or vascular disease, before you start your light exercise.
Right. If you have, yeah. And so that would be an evening walk. And now if you're, for, the sustained, more vigorous exercise, go on an empty stomach, get up, have some water, go for your walk, and that's the safest way, because, chances are their glucose is a little bit elevated anyway. From overnight. So that actually helps to get the morning glucose down, but doesn't have the vascular risk of having to make your heart pump so much harder.
Okay, great. Okay, well, we're closing out. So final thoughts. What are your final thoughts on what we want to do to just build health through all stages of our life, so that as we age, it's going to be helpful. We're going to enjoy it. We're going to enjoy our family and our community.
Consistency, finding something that you like to do on a regular basis, and pushing the envelope a little bit. So a little bit out of your comfort zone. Sometimes people jump in and they go do a bunch of things and they get injured, and then they're off, and then they fall off, so we want people to push the envelope a little bit, but not to the point where they get injured. Sometimes it's hard for people that haven't exercised to tell the difference between injury and just discomfort. So we want a little discomfort. We don't want injury, and we want consistency. So find something that you like, maybe find multiple things that you like. I like having a goal. We sign up for one race after another race. We have things that, are goals that we want to be able to do. There are, whether it's a strength training goal or a mobility goal. I think it's important to have those and then to work towards those, but in a consistent fashion, and don't lose sight of the goal.
Yeah. Good advice. Well, I know that you're on your way to one of your nutrition classes. Today's the potluck. So if you want to know more about Dr. Dulaney's practice, check out our Show More section, and we'll have lots of research there for you as well related to our topics today. Thank you again, Dr. Dulaney.
Thanks for having me.